Welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks, I think, since the last vlog. It's also been a couple of weeks since the GDPR came into force. The sky hasn't fallen down. The world hasn't ended. The program has finally completed. There's one left up there, but you can't see that, so we'll pretend that one doesn't exist. So what I wanted to talk about today is the only things that have really changed since in the last couple of weeks since the GDPR has come into force, and what's really been seen in our business and things that I've been seeing. The main change that came in as a part of this was the right to be forgotten, so the right to erasure, which gave individuals the right to have their information removed from systems and removed from the internet under different circumstances. Since last Friday, we've actually seen a number of requests come in from customers in different parts of our business and in different businesses within the group, asking for their information to be forgotten. As part of the program, we'd built in a process to handle those requests, but we're seeing requests for different reasons, and sometimes they're not always really aligned. So I thought this would actually be a really good one to do today. So the right to be forgotten sits under Article 17 in the GDPR, and it's designed to allow people to request that their information is removed from a system when that processing or that information is no longer required for a particular processing activity. It allows them to request it to be removed if they've given consent for the activity and that consent has been retracted. It also allows it to be removed if there's a legal obligation. So if you're asked to do it by the ICO, if you're asked to do it by the courts. What the right to be forgotten also does is provide a number of exemptions whereby individuals may be able to make that request, but it doesn't necessarily mean that an organisation has to comply. So the key thing here is that the right to be forgotten is not what they call an absolute right. An absolute right is something where an organisation cannot deny that right at all. So something like objecting to direct marketing is an absolute right. Somebody asks for that to happen, there is nothing that you can do. You have to agree to it. Whereas the right to be forgotten doesn't have that. There are exemptions to that. The key exemptions to this are things along the lines of legitimate interests. So if you have an overriding legitimate interest in retaining the information, then you are still permitted to keep a record of that individual. A good example of that might be if you work in an insurance industry or any kind of claims-based industry whereby somebody has bought an insurance product from you and they've made a claim on that product, then you have an overriding legitimate interest in keeping information relating to that claim, so that obviously that you know that they've done that, and you'll be able to deal with your underwriters appropriately and make sure that any future products are appropriately priced. Another good example of that is the legal obligation. So if you have a legal obligation to retain data, then again the right to be forgotten won't necessarily apply. So for instance, if you work in any kind of accountancy business, if you work in your own organisation, and obviously you have to do accounts and you have to do audits, then you may well have a legal obligation to retain information for anywhere up to 6 years, usually for tax purposes. For ourselves, we're an FCA regulated organisation, so we have legal obligations under FCA rules. That means that we also have to keep information on individuals for a certain period of time. So the right to be forgotten is not an absolute right, and it doesn't always have to be actioned. The key thing here is that you really need to understand when you're getting a request whether you have a legitimate overriding interest in maintaining a record of the information, or whether you have a legal obligation to keep that information for a longer period of time. And you're going to need to be able to communicate that back to the individual and tell them the reason why you're not going to delete their information. Now that will only, of course, get you so far. So that legal obligation will eventually come to an end, so you need to have a retention period in place. So if it is 6 years, if you do need to keep a record for tax purposes, then at the end of that 6 years you should still be prepared to get rid of that record and to delete that record. It's an interesting challenge because we are, as I say, we are getting a lot of requests across different areas of the business, and they're being handled in different ways, and we are working out the best way to do that. So the main thing is, if you do get a right to be forgotten request, please don't forget this is not an absolute right. You do not have to action it straight away. If you have a legitimate overriding interest in keeping that information, if you have a legal obligation in maintaining that information for a period of time, then you are permitted to keep hold of that information. But you do need to make sure that you're informing the individual or you're informing the customer, and then you do need to make sure that you've got a retention period further down the line that would ensure that information is being deleted. That was it for today. As I say, it's been a couple of weeks. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. I'm sure there's some other things that we need to pick up on, but I'll keep an eye on what's going on in the world, and hopefully I'll get back to you, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks very much.